reserves, all at no cost to hardworking American taxpayers. As I close, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a letter from the City of Waco in support of Title V of this bill.
The gentleman's request will be covered under general leave.
Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Continue to reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Washington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I am pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Labrador, who is the author of Title 11 of this bill.
The gentleman from Idaho is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand to speak in support of Title 11, the Grazing Improvement Act of 2012. Livestock grazing is an important part of the rich ranching tradition in America. One need look no further than the iconic images of cowboys driving the huge herds of cattle across open land to realize how big a part ranching has played in American history. Today, my home state of Idaho produces some of the world's finest tasting lamb and beef, which makes its way to dinner tables across America and as far away as Korea. Food production is a major part of Idaho's history and is an integral part of our cultural fabric and our economic security. These traditions are under attack, and we must preserve them for future generations. Ranchers are proud stewards of the land. Their reputation and financial security depend on this basic fact. Yet the process to review the very permits which allow them to produce food has become severely backlogged due to lawsuits aimed at eliminating livestock from public lands. The local federal land managing offices, staffed by fine men and women, cannot keep up with the pace of litigation and endless environmental analysis. This diverts the already limited resources from these offices and leaves ranchers at risk of losing their grazing permits and jeopardizing their livelihoods. Agriculture is a difficult way to make a living, but producers choose this path because it is their livelihood, their passion, and their way of life. When my constituent, a Owyhee County rancher Brenda Richards, testified on behalf of H.R. 4234 in March, she talked not just about the efficiencies the bill would bring to the overall system, providing cost savings to taxpayers, but she passionately expressed the unstable situation facing ranchers like her. 78% of Owyhee County is public land, making local ranchers and the county economy dependent on reliable yet responsible access to public land forage. According to Richards, ranchers not only face uncertainty each year about whether permits will be renewed, they're also being threatened with new bureaucratic red tape when it comes to crossing and trailing their animals across public lands. Radical special interest litigants have driven the agencies to consider this low-impact activity a major agency action that requires full environmental analysis under NEPA. The Grazing Improvement Act of 2012 would accomplish 3 important things. First, it extends livestock grazing permits from 10 to 20 years in order to give producers adequate stability. Second, it also reduces the workload on overburdened federal land managers on the local level and allows them to get out of the field where they belong. And finally, the legislation includes bipartisan language to encourage land managers to use existing tools in order to expedite permit processing. We can be good stewards of our land and resources without hurting American ranchers. We must alleviate the problems caused by a tedious bureaucratic process created only to respond to the litigious environmental agenda. We can no longer allow the federal government to maintain an enormous backlog in processing grazing permits. My legislation aims to ensure grazing certainty and stability for America's livestock producers. Our ranchers depend upon it. I urge my colleagues to support this common sense legislation. I yield the remainder of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And wanted to talk and maybe list so that the American people and the members of Congress understand the scope and the depth of 2587, and particularly Title 14. National Park Service units within 100 miles of the U.S., Mexico, and U.S. Canadian borders. There are 54 National Park Service units and 11 National Park Service wilderness areas. There are Acadia National Park, Amistad National Recreation Area, Apostle Islands National Lakeshore, Gaylord Nelson Wilderness, Big Bend National Park, Cabrillo National Park, Carlsbad Caverns National Park, Calvert Cavern Wilderness, Casa Grande Ruins National Monument, Chamizal National Memorial, Chiricahua National Monument, Chiricahua Wilderness, Coronado National Memorial, Cuyahoga Valley National Park, Ebby's Landing National Historic Reserve, First Ladies National Historic Site, Fort Bowie National Historic Site, Fort Davis National Historic Site, Fort Stanwix National Monument, Fort Union Trading Post Historic Site, Gila Cliff Dwellings National Monument, Glacier National Park, Glacier Bay National Park, Glacier Bay National Preserve, Glacier Bay Wilderness, Grand Portage National Monument, Guadalupe Mountains National Park, Guadalupe Mountains Wilderness, International Peace Garden, Isle Royale National Park and Wilderness, James A. Garfield National Historic Site, Joshua Tree National Park, Kewaunee National Historic Park, Klondike Gold Rush National Historic Park, Lake Cleland National Recreation Area, Lake Roosevelt National Recreation Area, Marsh Billings Rockefeller National Historic Park, Nez Perez National Historic Park, North Cascades National Park, Stephen Mather Wilderness, Olympic National Park, Olympic Wilderness, Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument, Oregon Pipe Wilderness, Padre Island National Seashore, Palo Alto Battlefield National Historic Park, Perry's Victory and International Peace Memorial, Picture Rocks National Lakeshore, River Raisin National Battlefield Park, Ross Lake National Recreation Area, Sawato National Park, Sawato Wilderness, St. Croix Island International Historic Site, San Juan Island National Historic Park, Theodore Roosevelt Inaugural National Historic Site, Theodore Roosevelt National Park, Tumacacori National Historic Park, Voyagers National Park, White Sands National Monument, Women's Right National Historic Park, Wrangell St. Elias National Park, Wrangell St. Elias Historic National Preserve, Yukon Charlie Rivers National Preserve. I list those because these are not turning these shared treasures of the American people from the land managers that provide the access, the interpretation, and the multi-use mandate to these areas, to an agency like Homeland Security with no expertise, no track record, no history, and giving them carte blanche, almost czar-like control over these valuable legacy parks of our nation is one of the reasons that we have 66 organizations, environmental, Latino, and consumer organizations opposed to the legislation and opposed in particular to Title 14. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Arizona reserves his time. The gentleman from Washington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Canseco, who is author of Title IV of this bill.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the Chairman, Mr. Hastings, the Parks Subcommittee Chairman, Mr. Bishop, and the staff of the Natural Resources Committee for working with me to move my legislation, the San Antonio Missions National Historical Park Boundary Expansion Act, through the committee and have it included as part of the bill before us. Would the Chairman enter into a brief colloquy with me? Very brief.
Yes.
All right. Is it the Chairman's understanding that after adoption of the Manager's Amendment, the bill contains reforms that would only allow for lands to come into the park via donation or exchange, and that these reforms apply only to the land coming into the park boundary as a result of the legislation before us?
The gentleman is correct with the adoption of the Manager's Amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to rise in support of the underlying legislation, which contains my legislation, the San Antonio Missions National Historical Park Boundary Expansion Act, which I introduced with the entire Bexar County, Texas delegation. In efforts to settle North America, the English founded Jamestown, Plymouth Rock, and other colonial settlements that school children learn about in U.S. history classes. The Spanish took a very different approach in their efforts to settle their possessions in North America. Instead of sending ships full of families to found new towns, the Spanish sent Franciscan priests to establish missions. At the missions, The Spanish priests would bring local Native Americans to live at the mission, teach them farming, educate them, and ultimately convert them to Christianity. The San Antonio Missions National Historical Park is an important asset to the community in San Antonio, Texas, and one of our nation's historic treasures. The San Antonio Missions National Historical Park is comprised of 4 mission churches: Mission Concepcion, Mission San Jose, Mission San Juan, and Mission Espada. Adjusting the boundaries of the San Antonio Missions National Park is absolutely critical to protecting these treasures and allowing the park to continue thriving and further enhance the visitor's experience. It is also a critical part of the redevelopment taking place on the south side of San Antonio. A recent study found that the San Antonio Missions National Historical Park supported over 1,000 local jobs and almost $100 million in economic activity. This boundary adjustment will help reconnect the missions to the San Antonio River, where the Mission Reach project is taking place to extend to the south side the economic prosperity and job opportunities enjoyed in other parts of San Antonio. Such redevelopment will allow for significant job and economic opportunities that currently do not exist in parts of San Antonio. The San Antonio missions are important to the nation in that they help visitors understand the history of our nation, its diverse origins, as well as the history of San Antonio and the history of Texas. I would also add that the 4 missions that comprise the San Antonio Missions National Historical Park are still functioning parish churches, continuing to fulfill the role of the San Antonio community for which they were founded almost 300 years ago. The San Antonio missions are just as important to understanding the story and the history of America as other historic places like Jamestown, Independence Hall, or Mount Vernon, and this legislation will help protect and preserve them for future generations of Americans to enjoy, all the while helping create jobs and economic opportunity on the south side of San Antonio. I thank you very much, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Arizona.
Continue to
Gentleman
reserve.
reserves his time. The gentleman from Washington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I am pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Chaffetz, who is the author of Title II of this bill.
The gentleman from Utah is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Chairman Hastings, my colleague, the chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Bishop, for his support in this bill that we introduced, the section that will be included in this bill dealing with the Diamond Fork system. In Utah, we are blessed to live in one of the most beautiful parts of the world. We're also one of the fastest growing states in the nation. The Diamond Fork system, which is included as part of the Central Utah project, has a capacity to generate up to 50 megawatts of hydroelectric power. Currently, thousands of acre-feet of water flow through the Diamond Fork system through tunnels, pipes, and canals each and every second. This water is necessarily slowed through energy dissipators as they travel from Strawberry Reservoir to the Wasatch Front. This bill would allow those dissipators to be easily converted into turbines, thus being able to generate the necessary energy that we need along the Wasatch Front. The purpose of this bill that's been included in H.R. 2578 is to waive the unrecoverable sunk cost payments requirements that are inhibiting development of the hydropower at a Bureau of Reclamation facility in Utah. Existing Department of Interior regulation inhibits hydropower development on the Diamond Fork unit. If the sunk cost recovery requirement is waived, the project will go forward, thus being able to yield the following benefits. The Treasury is expected, according to the CBO, to get $2 million in revenue over 10 years that it otherwise would not have received. Let me repeat this. This is a net increase to the revenue to the Treasury. It is not an expense to the United States Treasury. In fact, if we don't pass this bill, we won't be able to recover some of those sunk costs. So the net increase to the revenue to the Treasury will go up. Energy consumers in my district, which is so desperately needed, will get up to 50 megawatts of new power. And the environmental benefits of this energy are numerous, given that it's clean and it's renewable. I'd also like to remind my colleagues that this bill passed the previous Congress through a voice vote. We introduced this in a bipartisan way. We have Democrats that sponsored on this bill as well as Republicans. And with that, I encourage the passage and yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you very much. I think the purpose of Title 14 of H.R. 2587 is not to make the border more secure. Rather, the purpose of the bill is to use the border security as a cover to effectively repeal more than a century of environmental protections for Americans living and working along our borders with Canada and Mexico. In April, the Natural Resources Committee held an oversight hearing with the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, during which the Government Accountability Office, the Interior Department, the Agriculture Department, and the Border Patrol all testified under oath that federal land management laws do not impair border security. According to a GA report, 22 of 26 Border Patrol agents in charge that were interviewed reported that federal land management laws have no impact on the overall security status of their jurisdictions. In summary, the number of Border Patrol agents in charge who found that federal land management laws were impeding border security but were prevented from fixing the problems by the Interior Department was exactly zero. The administration concurred with this finding at multiple hearings. The record is clear, and the problem this bill claims to solve does not exist. The true purpose of this legislation is also clear. The proponents oppose the more than 30 bedrock environmental protections effectively to be repealed by this legislation, including Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, everywhere, not just within 100 miles of the border. H.R. Title 14 employs a manufactured conflict with border security to weaken their applications. The laws to be waived by this act are the work products of dozens of administrations and Congresses, developed after thousands of hours of negotiation and compromise, and in most cases were enacted with a strong bipartisan support. Title 14 hands the Border Patrol a unilateral veto over all these laws, all this work, and all this bipartisan effort. Enactment of this legislation and Title 14 will not only allow DHAs to trample the ground near the border, it would also allow the agency to trample the rights of states and Native people. This legislation would empower individual patrol agents to enter tribal land without notice, conduct any and all activities, including excavation and construction, without regard for the presence of tribal sites and tribal leadership. The real problem of border enforcement is one of manpower, budgets, economic incentives, and difficult terrain. This bill addresses none of those concerns. We will not secure our borders by allowing our waters to be polluted. We will not secure our borders by allowing our air to be dirtier, by ignoring decade laws that have protected the environment and the American people. That will not bring security to the border. This legislation entitled 14 reduces the number of immigrants coming to this country. If it does, it will only be because the water, air, and economics of our border communities are so degraded that no one wants to come there anymore. This legislation is sweeping, it's reactionary, and this bill is not what it appears to be, and it should be rejected, and I reserve the balance.
Reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Washington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, who is the author of Title 10 of this bill.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, and I thank the chairman for his support of this provision in this bill. The title of my provision is the Preserving Access to Cape Hatteras National Seashore Recreational Area Act. The Cape Hatteras Act is about jobs. It's about taxpayers' right to access the recreational areas they own. It's about restoring balance and common sense to National Park Service management. This language would overturn a final rule implemented by the Park Service earlier this year that excessively restricts taxpayers' access to Cape Hatteras seashore and is unnecessary to protect the wildlife. It would reinstitute the Park Service 2007 interim management strategy to govern visitor access and species protection at Cape Hatteras. The interim strategy was backed by a 113-page biological opinion issued by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, which found that it would not jeopardize piping plover, sea turtles, or other species of concern. In addition to adequately protecting wildlife, this bill would give taxpayers more reasonable access to the land they own. It would reopen 26 miles of beach that are now permanently closed to motorized beach access and give seashore managers flexibility to implement more balanced measures that maximize both recreational access and species protection. By doing so, this bill would reverse the significant job loss and economic decline that Hatteras Island has experienced. I want to repeat that, Mr. Speaker. By doing so, the bill would reverse the significant job loss and economic decline that Hatteras Island has experienced since the Park Service cut off access to the most popular area of the seashore. This bill, my bill, and now this bill, has bipartisan support in Dare County. The county commissioners in Dare County are predominantly Democrat. They support this bill 100%. They ask that this bill move through the House. I am pleased to say that the North Carolina senators, Republican Richard Burr and Democrat Senator Kay Hagan, have introduced a companion bill that says exactly on the Senate side what this bill says on the House side. The bill is also supported by National Sportsmen's Group, including the American Sports Fishing Association and the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. Mr. Speaker, that's why I'm honored today to be on the floor with my colleagues to support this legislation. It is time for the taxpayers to be considered, and it's still time that we protect the species that are endangered. This is a balanced piece of legislation, not just talking about my aspect of it, but the bill itself. So I hope that my colleagues will support this legislation in a bipartisan way, and let's send this bill to the Senate, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Without a doubt, proponents of 2587, in particular Title 14, the border bill portion, will claim this legislation will end the horrors of the border. It will secure the border, and finally Arizona and the rest of the nation will be ready to sit down, conduct real work, and reach comprehensive immigration reform. The horrors they will describe, the rape tree, the murders, the abuse of people, some are quite real. The violence is conducted by criminals organizations that prey on desperate and poor people, fueled by a drug trade that produces billions upon billions of dollars for these very criminals that create the violence. In the last decade, over 4,000 souls have died trying to cross through the most desolate parts of the Arizona desert. And this human tragedy should not be the excuse to undo environmental and public protection laws, which the majority has been attacking on all fronts since the beginning of this Congress. This is a dangerous precedent, that in order to secure the border, we must lose those protections. It's an absurd connection, and there is no correlation. Interesting that in the list of laws to be waived, if we are truly to make a dent in that violence, we find no mention of suspending the unregulated gun shows that happen in border regions. 85% of the assault rifles used by cartels and organized crime syndicates along the border and in Mexico originate in the United States from these gun shows. Interesting, there is no mention of suspending federal support for U.S. financial interests that harbor and launder money from Mexican crime syndicates here in the United States. The environmental laws and protections being eliminated under Title 14 will not bring long-term solutions to our beleaguered southern border. These laws are not the reasons for the stress. The reason for the stress is the unwillingness of this Congress to deal with immigration reform and a broken immigration system. Enforcement is part of the solution. It is not the only part of the solution. It is The stress is caused by politicians who either exploit the issue for their own gain or run away from the issue because of their own fear for it. To begin to deal with this issue, we need the resolve to work toward comprehensive immigration reform. But all the majority wants to do is scapegoat its lack of resolve to deal with this real issue in order to advance an agenda to hijack the laws that have served our public lands and our citizens well for decades. This is a terrible precedent. It's backdoor amnesty for polluters, developers, and mining industries. And those extremists want all these protections and laws, environmental laws, eliminated. The border is the excuse. The target is the environment. With that, I reserve the balance of our time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Washington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Herger, who is the author of Title VIII of this bill.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of H.R. 2578, the Conservation and Economic Growth Act, which would extend the bipartisan Herger-Feinstein-Quincy Library Group Forest Recovery Act for 7 more years, ensuring that the Forest Service has a stable and consistent period to fully implement it. At the discretion of the Forest Service, the bill would also allow for its expansion to all National Forest System lands within parts of California and Nevada. The expansion of the pilot project will enable the Forest Service to use the effective QLG approach in additional forest communities. The Northern California Congressional District I represent includes all or parts of 7 national forests. The rural forest communities near to them have been devastated by years of mismanagement of our national forests. Nearly 20 years ago, a group of local environmentalists and citizens formed the Quincy Library Group to develop a collaborative and locally driven solution to bring health and stability to our communities and the forests they live in. The QLG's efforts brought about the bipartisan Herger-Feinstein-Quincy Library Group Forest Recovery Act. Mr. Chairman, we need common sense forest management that allows communities to utilize their natural resources and create jobs while also restoring the health of our forests. The Quincy Library Group pilot project can provide a model for achieving these critical goals. In 2007, the 64,000-acre Moonlight Fire occurred in the Plumas National Forest. That fire came to an abrupt halt when it reached the antelope at a QLG-constructed defensible fuel profile zone. It saved tens of thousands of spotted owl habitat from burning. Mr. Chairman, this is the solution to our catastrophic wildfire problem that can and should be replicated. I urge my colleagues to extend and expand this balanced and collaborative project.
Expired. The gentleman from Arizona.
Continue to reserve, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
The gentleman from Arizona reserves his time. The gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Chairman, I inquire of my friend from Arizona. We have no more requests for time, and I'm prepared to close if the gentleman is prepared to close.
Yes, we are.
I'll reserve my time.
Gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This package of 14 bills is an unwarranted combination of individual bills that will do serious and lasting damage to communities and people across this country. Many of the individual pieces are controversial, but they are overshadowed by Title 14, the drone zone title. The drone zone created by this bill will trample the environment and the personal freedoms of millions of people living within 100 miles of the border. At a time when the clock is ticking on the reauthorization of the Highway Trust Fund, where real jobs can be created, we are wasting time on this misguided package. At a time when the clock is ticking on making college loans remain affordable, we are wasting time on this package. We should reject H.R. 2578 and get down to the serious work, which is to create jobs, help the middle-class families, and make ends meet. Mr. DeFazio and Ranking Member Markey and I will be offering amendments to address the absolute worst aspects of this package. I urge my colleagues to support the amendments. Unfortunately, even those amendments cannot fix all that is wrong with this package, and I asked my colleagues to reject H.R. 2578. There is a point in which common sense and sanity should prevail in this House. We have a piece of legislation that begs the question on both before us, and I would urge its defeat, and I yield back the remainder of my time, Mr.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Chairman, can I inquire how much time I have left?
The gentleman from Washington has 8 minutes remaining.
I yield myself the balance of the time.
The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, let's go back to the basic issue really that's facing this country, and I alluded to it in my opening statement. And what Americans really want is jobs. And while this package of bills is in line with that, what it really does is added some certainty to those that live in and around federal lands, therefore allowing for at least some certainty as it relates to jobs, but probably as important, if not more important, access to our public lands for those that want to utilize our public lands. There has been much discussion here about how this bill does some damage to the environment. Well, let me just touch on a couple of issues that was mentioned on the other side, and I think it needs to be clarified at least here before this debate is over. First, the reference was made to sea lions that were guilty of one thing, and that was eating only fish. Well, I happen to be the author of the title of that bill, and let me clarify. There's the rest of the story here. We had a hearing in the Natural Resources Committee, the full committee today, on the Endangered Species Act. I think, frankly, it hasn't been reauthorized for 25 years, and I think we need to update that act to make sure that we recover species. And my colleagues on the other side of the aisle said it's a great act. Okay, that's good. We at least have some establishment of commonality. The reason that provision in the bill regarding sea lions is that salmon are listed as threatened on the Columbia River. And as they move upstream after coming back from the ocean, they get crowded going up Bonneville Dam. Now, there's a non-indigenous animal called the California sea lion that comes up there and feasts on these fish as they're going through the Bonneville Dam. So it's destroying an endangered species. And the California sea lions is not listed as endangered, and they're not indigenous. So that part of legislation simply allows for lethal taking of those sea lions so the fish can pass upstream and spawn. Nothing more than that. It's a cute way to borrow a phrase to say that they're guilty of only eating fish. But there's more to that story. This legislation also encourages the development of renewable hydropower. What could be cleaner than that? It promotes healthy forests and prevents forest fires, as my colleague from Northern California just said in regard to the title of the, bill, of the act that he has in there. It restores access to different parts for recreational purposes in the North Cascades and at Cape Hatteras on the Atlantic coast. And it preserves old growth in Alaska. So, Mr. Chairman, there is a lot to be liked about this bill. But it seems most of the discussion is around Title 14. Let me read the title of Title 14 one more time. It is the National Security and Federal Lands Protection Act. Now, why do we need that? Because unfortunately there are those that want to come into our country illegally. And they don't have the same feelings as we do about our public lands. And when they come through illegally, in many cases they trash those lands. We're simply giving the Border Patrol more tools to protect those public lands and to provide for our national security. I don't know why anybody on the floor of this House should be opposed to that aspect. That's all that Title 14 does, as was explained very well by the author of provision, Mr. Bishop of Utah. So, Mr. Chairman, this bill is worth supporting. It has been developed in a bipartisan method. It has been developed in a transparent method, having gone through the committee process. So I urge adoption. I yield back the balance of my time.
Back is time. All time for general debate is expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill will be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. It shall be in order to consider as an original bill for purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 112-25. That amendment is in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. No amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order except those printed in House Report 112-539. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report by a member designated in the report shall be considered read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have a minute.
Will the gentleman kindly suspend? It is now in order to consider amendment number 1, printed in House Report 112-539. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in House Report number 112-539, offered by Mr. Hastings of Washington.
Pursuant to House Resolution 688, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington. The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment makes some technical, clarifying, and conforming changes to the underlying bill. It amends Title 4, subsection 4, to delete a portion of the land that the National Park Service does not want to acquire for the San Antonio missions and which would expose it to liability for cleanup costs. It conforms the text of Title 6, subsection 6, to match what the House passed in the 111th Congress in H.R. 2806, and it conforms Title 8 with the leadership protocols regarding the length and amount of authorizations. And finally, it clarifies what funds states may use to increase access to target ranges under Title 12. With that, I urge adoption and reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On manager's amendment, we have no problem with the technical changes to the legislation. The content remains the same, and the opposition remains the same. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Washington.
I yield back my time and urge adoption.
All questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Washington. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. It is now in order to consider amendment number 2, printed in House Report 112-539. For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in House Report number 112-539, offered by Mr. DeFazio of Oregon.
Pursuant to House Resolution 688, the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. DeFazio, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon.
I thank the chair. My amendment is simple. What it says is that should this legislation pass and the 100,000 acres of forest pass over to the Sealaska Native Corporation, a for-profit corporation, that we would ban the export of unprocessed logs from those lands. This would be consistent with the law that applies to the lower 48 west of the Mississippi River. In 1990, I partnered with Senator Bob Packwood from Oregon to make permanent what had then been an appropriations rider ban since the era of Wayne Morse. And the rationale for that was that we should not be a tree farm for other nations. We want to be an industrial nation. We want to get value added. We want to export finished products overseas. We've seen in the last couple of years a flood of private land exports from Oregon and Washington, which is timber actually being wasted. Till very recently, the Chinese were paying above market prices for raw logs, Douglas fir logs, which they were using prime timber one time in construction forms and then discarding. An incredible waste of a resource. And also a economic loss to the Pacific Northwest. despite the fact that Washington State exported $1 billion worth of non-federal raw logs last year, which is twice the amount that they exported just 2 years before. The number of logging jobs did not increase despite this export, and the number of sawmill jobs dropped by 1/3 in Washington State. We're exporting a limited natural resource to which we could add value through what we have are the most productive mills in the world in the United States of America, and instead those logs are going overseas and we're actually losing jobs. Yes, it is profitable for the private landowners, and we do not have restrictions on the export of private logs. But this is public forest lands today, which would be converted to private forest lands, and we believe that the potential benefits should be maximized should this happen, and that these logs should be manufactured before being exported. If they were exported, I would say, in fact, there would be a substantial raw log market in my state, because my mills are importing timber from around the world, actually, and from other states in the U.S. To keep their mills running. And in the same, in Oregon, non-federal raw log exports, again, private land exports, have doubled over the last 3 years to $2.3 billion in value, while my sawmills and logging industry reached new lows. These are, this harvesting for export of raw logs is not benefiting the local economies or the United States of America. And in Alaska, raw log exports from Alaska to China have increased 16-fold over the last decade, yet, you know, the economic benefits of running those logs or potentially running those logs through sawmills was not realized, benefiting rural communities. I have many depressed rural areas which I represent. You know, we're fighting over how we can get some more logs off federal lands, logs which can't be exported. You know, these logs could not only benefit Alaskans who could use the manufacturing jobs, and perhaps they would see some new investment in sawmill capacity should this amount of timber come onto the market, but also potentially other West Coast states, including Oregon and Washington, where our sawmills are struggling to find adequate supply. So I believe this would be a beneficial, common-sense amendment. It would bring they are federal logs today, federal trees, federal forests, and would make the use of those logs, should they be harvested, consistent with the rest of the federal lands in the western United States. And with that, I would yield. I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to claim time in opposition.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Alaska.
The gentleman from Alaska is recognized for 4 minutes.
Ask unanimous consent to revive and extend.
Without objection.
I strongly oppose this amendment. I know this amendment may have good intentions, but it's misguided. It will hurt the employment in the native village of Alaska. We have studies that will show that the employment would not increase if we cannot export some of our logs. By the way, this amendment was in the Natural Resources Committee, and it was defeated 30-13. Last night, the Alaskan Forest Service wrote in strong opposition to the amendment, and very frankly, it's not right for the government to tell somebody on private land where they can sell their product. The only person should be able to do this is the owner of a product. We don't tell where the Californians sell their rice. We don't tell Weyerhaeuser where they sell their timber. And so we shouldn't be telling a private landholder where to sell the timber. In fact, if we had the Tongass National Forest, what little land we have left of less than 1.5 million acres that are federally owned as far as harvesting capability, if the Forest Service would do their job, we'd have some timber to harvest, but they're not doing that. But what timber they do harvest on federal land, they allow 50% of old-growth timber sales and 100% of new growth. And this is where we're talking about new growth, 100% to be sold. So this is a little bit, you know, I say, not sincere in the sense that this is not going to create jobs, and the federal government is already allowing timber to be sold wherever they wish to do. I would suggest respectfully the amendment is not placed correctly. I would like to keep the timber in the United States, but if the market's not there, or its bid is not as high as federal dollars, I mean overseas people that bid on it, then you have to let the private person, in fact, sell his timber. I will suggest respectfully, what the thing that concerns me most in this whole argument is some of the arguments against this legislation. This is about a native group that was not it's a corporation, but it's a native group of villages put together that have high unemployment rate. And we're getting all kinds of, I saw bull dip all across the internet now, saying that this, in fact, is going to give away. It's talking about roads being given away. It's talking about this is timber area. It's already been cut, and they do not want to cut the old timber area. They're trying to have a good industry built by silviculture. And this is what's so important here. But for some reason, like I say, they win the bull dip awards of the whole year on this legislation. And I understand what the gentleman's trying to do, but it's not right to have a private entity be told by the federal government where they can sell their product. We don't tell, you know, like the rice growers or tell anybody else where to sell their product. They sell it to the best market. And this is about the best market, and this would be wrong because they will have timber in a few years. I'd say maybe 50 years. They'll have the best timber stand in the whole state of Alaska because this area has already been cut. They'll take them thin, and they'll be able to sell this timber at a high price, probably to the United States by then, because we'll all be long gone. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oregon has 30 seconds remaining.
I yield myself such time as I may consider. I certainly respect the gentleman from Alaska, and I know that it is his intention to benefit the people of Alaska. I've been involved in this issue now for almost, well, for 22 years on the issue of exporting raw logs. And in fact, I did try and restrict the export of private logs back there in 1990 and couldn't get that. But at least we got the federal, and at least we've kept the state. And we do get value added, and we do, for every 1,000 board feet of timber harvested, we get more jobs than just a logging job, a trucking job, and a loading it on the ship job. We get the jobs in the mills. And I would argue that the same would flow to Alaska should this amendment pass. With that, I yield back the gentleman's time and urge my colleagues to support the amendment.
The gentleman from Washington has 2 minutes remaining.
How much time do I have?
2 minutes.
I yield myself the balance of the time.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition, obviously, to this amendment, because this amendment would single out one particular group of Native Alaskans for restrictions that currently only apply to timber harvested from certain federal lands in the lower 48. Now, the irony here, as was pointed out by the gentleman from Alaska, is that the Forest Service in the Tongass allows for 100% export of red cedar harvested in the Tongass and 50% of old growth harvested in the Tongass. So I think it is, all honesty, Mr. Chairman, a bit hypocritical to impose domestic manufacturing limitations on natives while the Forest Service is doing just exactly the opposite. And I'd also add, this amendment does not affect other landowners on the Tongass. It only affects the natives of Alaska. Now, I don't think that's really what we should be doing here on the floor of the House, is singling out one group for a penalty, and that's precisely what this amendment does. So I urge a rejection of this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oregon. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
On that, Mr. Chairman, I
pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oregon will be postponed. It is now in order to consider amendment number 3, printed in House Report 112-539. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk made in order under the rule.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in House Report number 112-539, offered by Mr. Markey of Massachusetts.
Pursuant to House Resolution 688, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts.
I thank the chair very much. We're about to talk about grazing fees, and, for people in many parts of the country, they may not know what that is, and that is that on federal lands across the country, cattlemen can bring their cattle onto federal lands, that is, the public lands of the United States, and graze. And what do they charge? Well, they're charged $1.35. That's exactly what they were charged in 1986. Now, right next to this federal land in many states, there is state land, and that state land in Colorado is, very valuable, but they ensure, the governor of Colorado, that the cattlemen there in that state pay $10 to graze, not $1.35. In Montana, cattlemen have to pay $7.90. In Utah, they have to pay $7.30. But on the public lands in each of those states, that is the federal lands, it's $1.35. Just has an increase. And who pays the price? Well, the federal taxpayer pays the price because the cattlemen get to basically have this incredible subsidy. So, just to use the analogy, when I started working, I got paid $1.35 when I was a kid. And I'm sure there are many people who would still like to just charge $1.35 for a kid to work in a supermarket, but they can't do it because time moves on, unless you're a cattleman where they have locked that minimum price into a hermetically sealed, cryogenically frozen price, $1.35. That's great, except for the federal taxpayer who cannot collect all of the money they need. Or let's just say, for the sake of the discussion, that you happen to have a rent-controlled apartment in New York City, and the rent was set back in 1986 and 1976. And now the markets have raised that price up to, perhaps $4,000. But the Republicans would say, well, rent control, that's good. We like keeping the price that way, because it benefits a certain class of people. And I understand the Republican philosophy of freezing in prices that way, keeping the minimum wage as low as possible, keeping the, rent control price for an apartment as low as possible. I understand the government intervention role of the federal government not allowing the free market to determine the price of something. But here, what happens is that it balloons the federal deficit because people aren't able to collect what we absolutely know to be the price to graze for a cow per day. We know what the price is because in the adjoining land in Colorado or Utah or in Montana or in Washington State, we know what the state is charging on state public land. So this is just an attempt to give the Department of Interior the ability to raise by $1, not all the way up to $10, not all the way up to $7, but just $1 from $1.35 up to $2.35. Just as a little experiment, just to see what happens out there in the market when people actually have to pay something that remotely approximates what the price to graze would be. At this point, Mr. Chairman, I would like to reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Washington,
I rise and claim time in opposition.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
And I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Idaho, the author of the title of this bill, Mr. Lambert.
The gentleman from Idaho is recognized for 4 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong opposition to this amendment, and let's talk about some facts and some figures and some numbers. The good gentleman from Massachusetts continues to say that we need to treat this land the same as private land. And the thing that's really fascinating to me is that we have in Colorado and Utah and Idaho many people who would like to actually do their grazing on state lands or private lands. But the difference is that in Massachusetts, only 1.6% of the land is actually federal land. In fact, if you look at the acreage, it's 81,000 acres in Massachusetts are federal lands. And that's why they can actually rely on many other things for their grazing and many other things that they do. In Idaho, 68% of the land is federal lands. In fact, we're talking about 32.5 million acres in Idaho that are actually having to be managed by the federal government and that we have to deal with on a daily basis in the state of Idaho. And we need to ask the question, why is it, I think most grazers, most producers would like to actually be doing it on federal lands, on state lands, where they actually will be paying more, but they actually receive more benefits for being on the state-owned lands and the state-managed lands. And my question to the gentleman is, why doesn't he allow Idaho and other states in the West to do what we want to do? which what we want to do is we actually want to manage our own lands. We have been asking that for a long time, but it's interesting to me that the states that only have 1.4% of federal land continue to tell the states that have 68% of federal lands that they cannot manage their own land. If we were allowed to manage our own lands, we would actually be able to charge a little bit more, but we would do away with all the NEPA requirements and all the other requirements that we have to deal with right now when we're on federal lands. So I think it's a little bit hypocritical for somebody to come here to the House floor and object to something that they don't even have to deal with in their own state. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Would the chair please inform us as to how much time is remaining?
The gentleman from Massachusetts has 1.5 minutes remaining, and the gentleman from Washington has 2.5 minutes remaining.
Okay, I will, at this point, continue to reserve the balance.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Chairman, I advise my friend from Massachusetts that I am the last speaker on this amendment, so if he's prepared to close, I'll close.
Okay, I thank the chair. So I yield myself the remainder of my time. So this argument that's being made by the Republicans it's nonsensical. What you're saying is that in your home state, on state land, you charge $10 or $7 to the cattlemen to graze. But on federal land, it's only $1.35 in your state. And your answer to raising the price for cattlemen is that we should be having a debate over whether or not the state of Colorado or Montana controls all of the federal land in your state. Then you'll begin to debate whether or not cattlemen should get away with only $1.35. You know, you're giving new definition to the term free-range beef. You know, you're allowing, you know, for the cattlemen in these states to get away with murder, and you're not even debating the issue of how they get away with this. You know, that's what all we want from you. Tell us why you think they deserve $1.35. You don't even want to reach that issue. You want to go off on the secondary issue of how much federal land in each state is controlled by how much land in each state is controlled by the federal government, which is not what we're debating. We're debating how cattlemen get away with this bargain basement price that then comes to every other state to make up the difference in the federal deficit because you're unwilling to collect it. Meanwhile, you say to grandma, higher rates for Medicare. You say to kids in schools, higher payback for the loans that you take out. But for the cattlemen in your home state, somehow or other you don't understand that this is a debate that goes to the heart of why it is that people are very unhappy with the way the federal government operates.
The chair would remind members to address their remarks to the chair. The gentleman from Washington.
I'll yield the balance of my time to me.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, this is a very interesting debate, but let's just put some facts as what this amendment would do. It would amount to a nearly 75% increase on the fees for public land grazers. Now, let me emphasize the word public land because we hear this all the time, and the idea is that public land is owned by all Americans, even people that live in states where there's not any federal lands. But I would just, Mr. Chairman, advise my colleagues that people that live on public lands own the public lands too, if the first argument is correct and the second argument is also correct. What is interesting about this grazing fee debate is, if this grazing fee is raised, it could potentially put livestock producers out of business. Now, maybe that is what the goal is of my good friend from Massachusetts, because that is certainly the stated goal of some environmental extremist groups. What is also interesting is, as was pointed out by my colleague from Idaho, when you operate on federal lands, you are subjected to endless litigation and review stemming from NEPA and outside attacks by environmental groups. But probably more important, and this is the distinguishing part on this whole debate, some people claim that these ranchers are subsidized, but the fact is when the West was settled, we were never given an opportunity to buy these lands for state purposes, and they remained in federal control. And so as a result, everybody has a say in public lands. And what my colleague from Idaho was simply saying, if we had control of our public lands, whether it's state land or private or county, we would probably manage it better. But we don't have that opportunity because we're never given the opportunity. And so as a result, we have to fight off these huge increases that come from people that probably have a different motion, different idea of what it's like. So I think this is an ill-advised amendment, and I urge its rejection, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts will be postponed. It's now in order to consider amendment number 4, printed in House Report 112-539. For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 4, printed in House Report number 112-539, offered by Mr. Bishop of Utah.
Pursuant to House Resolution 688, the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Bishop, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes.